Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Long Distance Work Life Podcast, the show where we desperately try to make sense of remote and hybrid work and how things are changing while helping you keep the weasels at bay. My name is Wayne Turmel. I am delighted to be here with you. I am a master trainer and coach at the Kevin Eikenberry Group. Marissa is not with us today. That is the sad news. The good news is we have somebody really interesting and terrific, and somebody whose work I've known for a very long time. And we're going to talk about the bane of everyone's existence. We're talking about meetings. So welcome, Rich Maltzman, all the way from Boston. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, thanks, Wayne. And yeah, we're going to talk about the bane of your existence.
Well, first of all, who are you? Why do we care? And then tell me about your book.
Yeah, so this, Rich Maltzman. I am a master lecturer at Boston University now, following a 40-year career at Nokia and its antecedent companies, all the way back to an ancient firm called Western Electric. And now I have, at any given time, 250, 300 graduate students studying project management. And in the interim, I've been consulting and co-authoring books. One a few years ago with Jim Stewart about facilitating great project meetings, and then a follow-up to that, which is called Great Meetings Build Great Teams. And that's why I'm here, I think.
Oh, but the book is so much a longer title than that, because it's actually Great Meetings Build Great Teams, a guide for project leaders and agilists.
Yes.
And I've had meetings that are shorter than that title.
Yes. But subtitles are good, right? Because they pull in the particular audience we want. And I really am focusing on this idea of project leadership versus project management. And that feeds into the idea of building great teams. A good leader, a good manager manages, gets by. A leader develops followers. A leader gets influence on others, or has influence on others, and inspires them to be interested in the project. And we think meetings, instead of being a bane of the existence, can be a place where you're building that influence and you're building that followership.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I love that you're focusing on project leaders, because that's really where a lot of remote work, as we know it currently, got its start, right? Was in the tech world, Agile and other things. But more importantly, projects would come together and they would hire people from wherever they could find them.
Yes.
And very often they were geographically dispersed. And so a lot of what we learned about what makes remote work happened through the project management world.
Yeah. In fact, projects are the touch point where strategy meets operations, right? So a company has a vision and a mission, they've got ideation, they've got a culture, all of that ivory tower stuff comes down to a strategy, and that strategy now needs to get executed, whether it's building a series of buildings, whether it's writing a bunch of apps. That organization focuses on a strategy to get stuff done, so that every day that there are people using the app, driving over the bridge. It's projects that are at that touch point. So that's a project, that's an advertisement for project management. I would rather focus on what project managers actually end up doing, like it or not, which is bringing people together via meetings.
Well, yes. And so that brings me to the title, which is Great Meetings Build Great Teams, which is not great meeting, great teams have great meetings. It's that the meetings themselves have a function beyond just information transfer. When you say that great meetings build great teams, this is your permission to go down the rabbit hole. What are we talking about here?
Okay. So some meetings are purpose-built for building a team. A kickoff meeting, one of the main drivers for a project, is to bring everyone together from the different silos and say, we are all working together. You from marketing, you from sales, you from engineering and technical fields, installation, programming, whatever the different functions are that are needed to do this, which are typically silo-fied, if that's a word.
It is now.
Have been brought together for the distinct purpose of your project. And you, Mr. or Ms. Project Manager, are the person chartered with getting action from those people, even though they don't often report to you. So specifically, a kickoff meeting is a place to first build the team. But I think the thread of the book, thanks in part to the chapter you helped co-author, is the fact that throughout the project, you will need ongoing meetings. The infamous status meeting or update meetings, stand-up meetings in the world of Agile. The team needs to continue to be built and fed and watered, if you make a plant analogy, throughout the life of the project. It will wither and die if you have this great, you buy it from their plant shop and you put it in your office and it looks like a beautiful plant. 3 weeks later, it's drooping and brown because it hasn't been cared for. It's that continuous support of the team and the continuous fueling of a team spirit that we think the book actually gives you some advantage to do in the non-kickoff meetings, which are also really, really important, especially in a longer project.
Right. So I'm going to break this down into a couple of pieces.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what happens in that kickoff meeting. What are the very practical, tactical things that a leader should ensure happens? And notice I didn't say the leader has to do. I just
Correct.
said the leader ensures happens.
Correct. Yeah, we talk about the role of the project leader as a facilitator. And one of the things, this is a side note, but I'll get to your question, is that the project manager running a meeting often has someone, should have someone taking notes and kind of looking at the body language and who's paying attention and so forth, kind of a deputy in the meeting, so that the project manager can keep that meeting focused on. And here's the answer to your question: the purpose of the project. Why are we here together at this meeting? But more importantly, why are we here together as project team members? Why we value each of these different contributors, you, Mr. Installer, you, Ms. Marketing Person, why you are fundamental to the success of the project. So at that kickoff meeting, it should really focus. Well, I like to go to number 2 of the 7 habits of highly effective people. Begin with the end in mind. You should be at that point, if you have something you can physically show for your visual folks, that this is what we're building, right? Maybe a mock-up of an app, maybe a model of an apartment building. This shining example, this is what we're heading for. Right. So to answer your question, the purpose of that kickoff meeting is to assure that people understand what success looks like and why it's important to them and why it's important to them and ties in with the mission of the organization. This is that really important golden thread from mission, vision, and values to daily operations that sometimes gets broken.
What? What do you think we've learned? Agile is one of those things that everybody talks about and very few people actually understand.
Yes.
For those of us who are not, deep in the Agile code building kind of world,
Mm-hmm.
What do you think Agile has brought, both positive and negative, to those of us who are just running meetings and trying to lead our teams? And
so I would say, first of all, and my colleague and co-author Jim would also make the argument that Agile is not just for software development. He's been working in pharmaceuticals with developers of new medicines that use this technique. So it is, of course, most applicable in software development. But to your point, I think one of the things Agile brought along, it's a mindset. It brought along a mindset that the development of whatever it is iterative. Try and fail, try and fail, try and fail, try and fail, fail, and then succeed, as opposed to having a long-term plan that takes everything into account and then executes that plan. Now, I'm going to give you my philosophy here. I think, like many things these days, we've become polarized, and that there are people who are evangelists for the waterfall or predictive method. There are those who are evangelists for the agile method, and they each think the opposite is terrible. And yet they have so much more in common than either would admit. I have a 3-word mantra for this: use what works. Now, specifically, Agile has added some really cool tools that I use all the time. Kanban boards, Jira as a piece of software that helps you manage. It's how we wrote our book. We wrote the book using Jira as software that helps us see what's being done, what needed to be done, and so forth. Stand-up meetings, the whole concept of having a meeting that's intended to be so short that your legs would be tired if it goes too long. There's no chairs. So the concept of a stand-up meeting, we cover these in the book. And there is no reason in the world that a waterfall project, so-called predictive project, couldn't use some of the techniques from the Agile world. And oh, by the way, there's no reason, in my opinion, that if a Gantt chart works for an Agile project, that you shouldn't be forbidden from ever even thinking about any words that start GANTT. So I'm a big believer in the idea of moderation, of harmony, of not evangelizing either side of that equation. But so to your question, Agile has brought some great meeting techniques. They use some fancy words. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they don't talk about a war room where you have a room that has progress charts and so forth. They call it an information radiator, right? So in Agile, they brought in some terms that are meaningful, right? But they're not foreign to me as an older person who was raised in the predictive world. I see it as another way of thinking about how you communicate. You are an information or you can provide information radiation.
Well, and while that is a lovely term, and I kind of dig it, I also am a firm believer in, I don't care what you call it, Fred, for all I care, as long as it gets done.
Use what works.
And that is kind of where we are now. One of the themes in the book, and I was happy to contribute my little piece to it, but the really important thing is, I think we get hung up today on meetings are either in person or virtual, and that they are somehow completely different animals.
Right. You need to acknowledge a virtual meeting has its own characteristics, as you and your partner have so eloquently expressed. But the same principles apply. So although a virtual meeting like the one we're having now requires that we both have reasonable lighting and audio and so forth, and these are important things that are pointed out in the book in that chapter and beyond, most of the other things apply 100%. Be large and in charge. Be aware, and we'll talk about these later, of meeting goblins, those evil spirits that take over people and have them behave in different ways at meetings. These same meeting goblins have no problem logging in to a virtual meeting and becoming Billy the Bully or Sandeep the Showboat. So the same principles apply. What's different is the overhead and the considerations of the fact that you have someone in a different time zone, you have someone in a different physical region, you have someone with different culture who may not want to show their face in a virtual meeting, and you should take that into account too. So there's some overhead with a virtual meeting, but the principles of good facilitation apply.
Excellent. So let's get to the fun part, which is talk to me about the goblins.
So these were introduced in our first book. The idea is very simple, and it's very easy. If you drive a car or even ride a bike, but mostly drive a car, you're familiar with this idea. When you're driving your car and someone is weaving down the highway and or cutting you off, my guess is that even if you're a really nice person, you are saying some words that you normally don't say to that person. In fact, you might even be that person who's doing the weaving, because your personality changes somehow when you turn from pedestrian to driver. I don't think that some of the things that you use gestures for and say nastily as you're driving, you would not say if you were just walking down the street. The point is that you take on a different personality sometimes when you get in your car. I notice it for myself, I will admit. That same thing happens in meetings. There are people who enter a meeting room and for some reason become the person who doesn't speak at all, or the person who is talking in the back of the room, on the side, kind of making comments on the side, or you're the person who kind of seems to want to take over the meeting. You love the stage. That personality comes out, and we've actually tried to express that on the cover, which those of you in audio will have to listen to this. There are shadows behind some of the people on the attending the meeting on the cover, because they have those personalities coming out. And that's shown with this kind of this idea of a shadow, which was a great idea by Christina Carlson, our Canadian artist. So she pictured this after we talked with her about what we wanted our cover to look like, and it's perfect. This is what we see people doing. And we have something like 9 goblins in the book. Rosie the Reticent is one that we added this time. This is the person who has that great idea or has that admonition when you're doing risk identification, or even when you're not doing risk identification, and she won't raise her hand. She's shy. She's afraid, maybe because of a lack of psychological safety, that something that she needs to say about this thing that we're doing, this is wrong. And she needs to be heard. And so as a facilitator, and this is for project meetings, but also for any meetings, I think this book actually could apply to a wider audience. We've aimed it at project managers, but that person needs to be heard, and you need to encourage her to realize it's a safe environment where she can raise her hand, even if she has to say, "I'm speaking as a devil's advocate." So that's a goblin, right? It's a quiet goblin, but that's a goblin. You also have noisy goblins like Billy the Bully. This is the person who craves the stage and wants to just get up and speak, and basically they've hijacked the meeting. As a project manager, you need to sometimes be very direct with that person and say, "Billy, this is an excellent point. We can have a separate meeting about it, but we have a specific set of things we need to accomplish in this meeting. We'll set aside time for you later, but right now I need to take the meeting back." And you need to be direct with a person like that.
Yeah, I think that's, they call it leading a meeting for a reason, that there are some leadership things that have to happen. One of the things, and this is not a goblin that you mentioned, but it's something that I have to be aware of, is sometimes meeting behavior passes through the leader's filter, right? And so somebody might look like Billy the Bully. I mean, I have one behavior that I see all the time, which is the team lawyer. And this is the person who looks like they're dominating the meeting. And in their mind, they're asking the questions or saying the things that nobody else is.
Mm-hmm. So you have to hear them, right?
You have to hear them, and you have to give other people the chance as well. And that can be a little bit of a tricky.
Right. And leadership, and one of the points we make, leadership can also involve, and sometimes this is a physical, visual thing, tearing up the agenda and say, "Look, this new topic we brought up is so urgent and important that we have to face it now." And you literally tear up the agenda and say, "I think at this point we'll table the other things. Let's focus on this. This has to be addressed now. There's an urgency to this. There's an importance to this that's maybe it's safety related that we have to address right now." And there are times, no, you don't do that all the time. One of the points we make also is that as a project manager / leader and a meeting facilitator, you're judged on the way the meeting goes. So you walk out of a meeting where, let's say, Phil is running the meeting and Phil's doing a lousy job. You know what the scuttlebutt, the murmuring, the buzz will be as people are walking the room. He can't even manage a meeting. How's he going to manage this project? So there's a contagion. There's a relationship. There's a contagion between the way you act at the meeting and the way you're perceived as a project leader. That's really important, because you are being judged, like it or not, and the way you run the meeting is going to contage to the way you're perceived as being a project manager, right? From that perspective, and so it's very, very incumbent on you to either gain these facilitation skills, and we think this book will help. It's not the only one, but we think we assert that this book would help, or have a facilitator, hire someone, maybe Wayne, who is really good at facilitation, and have them, if it's an important enough meeting, have a facilitation person oversee the meeting so that you can do the some of the other things you might tend to do as a project manager. Ideally, you're both.
Now, time has escaped us and we are going to have to end it here. I do want to put a pin in something that Rich has said a couple of times, kind of alluded to it. The notion of have somebody take the notes, have somebody else write on the whiteboard so that your brain is free to do what you're doing. It's okay. You can lead the meeting. It doesn't mean you have to do everything yourself. And as a matter of fact, for all kinds of reasons, probably shouldn't. That being said, Rich, thank you for joining us. I am going to boot you out of the room while I close the show. You and I can continue our conversation afterwards. Thank you for joining us. If you are interested in the book, Great Meetings Build Great Teams, a guide for project leaders and Agilists, we will have links to Phil and Jim and the work on our show notes at longdistanceworklife.com. I am going to boot Phil out of here. While I thank you for listening, I really hope you found value in today's conversation. There is so much to be said about meetings and making hybrid and remote work more effective. If you are interested in how your teams can handle this kind of thing, check out Kevin Eikenberry and my new book, The Long Distance Team, Designing Your Team for Everyone's Success. You can get special offers and bonuses at longdistanceteambook.com. You are experienced podcast listeners, I am sure, even if you haven't listened to this one before. Please like and subscribe, help other people find us. We are open to your comments, your feedback. What do you want to hear? What are your pet peeves? What topics should we cover? You can contact me or Marissa through email or through LinkedIn. The notes, links, everything will be in the show notes. That's it. We're running long. I am going to leave you. My name is Wayne Turmel. Don't let the weasels get you down. We'll see you in the next episode.